can the church have moral authority when the people within it, including some of its leaders, don't act righteously, capable of sin, sometimes big sin, huh, Father Larry?
I was there when the Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, went and he repented for the sins of the church. Remember that? It's been many years ago now. But people were already then saying, Holy Father, you shouldn't do that. And the Holy Father was very clear that though the church is holy, because we are one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, it's made up of sinful members, because all of us are sinful people. And yet we're redeemed sinfulness. So like often people sit there and say to me, Father, I don't go to church because of all the hypocrites there. I always say, oh, you'd be fit right in now.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Come on in.
Just
because everybody's a hypocrite in some way or another. But that doesn't okay our sin. You know, that that the teaching of the church is clear about what comes from God. Now, the way some of us leaders, including myself, lived it, we don't always live it the way we need to. You know, that's why I got to go to confession. I go to confession every 2 weeks.
Wait a minute now. Wait a minute. That's weakness. What about those who deliberately, willfully mislead or do things wrong or live a double life as a clergy and then as someone who is
it's weakness, but it's also, it's sinfulness. But the church Jesus never said that we would be free from all sin, because that has never happened. From the very beginning, even when you look at the beginning, the 12 people that Jesus himself chose to found the church, one of them betrayed him.
Judas was an apostle.
Exactly. So from the very beginning, we've had problems, but the church the next 11 stayed faithful, even though Peter and that fell and different things, but they kept getting up and kept going. So hypocrisy and sinfulness will always be there. And that's why, again, when Jesus, he talks about it in Matthew 23 here, he says, you know, Jesus told the crowds, the scribes and the Pharisees have succeeded Moses as teachers. Therefore, do everything and observe everything they tell you, but do not follow their example. Hopefully, you can follow the example of most priests and bishops, and of course you can, because they are the leaders and they lead us, and hopefully, especially nowadays more than ever, these are some of the strongest people that give us the greatest moral example, especially someone like Benedict XVI and now Pope Francis. Oh my gosh. Here is a man who's living everything and bringing many people back in, because he's showing that, you know, he constantly asks people to pray for him, a sinner. Pray for me, pray for me. And what a great thing for that we know that instead of us judging everybody, we're called to have mercy on people. But when you're a leader, more is expected of us from God. So first of all, our laity need to be calling us to holiness too. Like, instead of just judging us and saying, I don't go to church because it's for hypocrites, why don't you come here and challenge me to be more loving, to challenge me to be more holy? And then when I go beyond that, to when I start dealing with when the church has sinned, that just like when I come before others and I want to be forgiven of my sin, so must we be willing to forgive. But when we catch that, we need to call for it and say, this is sin, we need to deal with it. We can't be running away and making excuses for the sins of the church. We have to acknowledge them.
Priest friend of mine said, everything is always about something else. How often do you see when somebody says, they're hypocrites, the religious leaders are hypocrites, that's why I'm not a follower of Christ, that's why I don't follow the church? Is it that they really don't want to and they're looking for a justification?
Sometimes, but sometimes it's because they've been hurt, you know, in their past, sometimes by one of us, and they're reacting to the hurt that they've incurred, they've got. So what we need to do is really, as a church, be reaching out to people and not saying, well, you can't think that. Why don't you forgive? Just forgive, move on. No, there's a lot of pain that needs to be dealt with.
Somebody comes to you, how often do you say to them, I am so sorry about the experience you had?
Exactly.
You do that?
I do.
You've never done it to me. You've never done it to me.
Because you're the one that usually makes us crazy. But anyway, but the reality is that we need to reach out. We need to be a church that reach out with, like the Holy Father talks, with great mercy, to reach out to people and invite them home and say, we are so sorry if you've been hurt, but we want to walk with you and make it better. We want, more than ever, I've been ordained 25 years, I see a church and its leadership that's longing for holiness. That wants to, what's happened in the past, we're just going to move on. We're not going to say what happened was okay, it was evil, and we portrayed it. But we are going to be people who keep our eyes focused on Jesus now and bring the reality. But throughout the whole history of the church, you'll see popes that were married and everything else, but God still used the church to speak his truth. Never has God allowed the church to ever teach anything in error, even when the people were sinful who were teaching it.
In matters of faith and morals.
Exactly, in matters of faith and morals. And so when God says the gates of hell will not prevail against it, that's what he meant in spite of us. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church because it's his church.
How could you have a church without people? And as soon as you introduce people, you've introduced sin. And even though we like our leaders to be holier, sometimes the human factor just keeps intruding. But our Lord protects his church.
And he's the true shepherd of the church.
Yeah.
Thanks be to God.